Okay, this is a PowerPoint history of children's books, and it's based on the article assigned for today, The Origin and History of American Children's Literature, and it's by Tennell, and it's from the reading teacher in late 2013. Now, there's a lot here in this article, and I kind of ran out of wind toward the end, but we'll see how we can do. Before I get started, I want to say that one of the main themes of the article was that children's books used to be very didactic, and there's always that struggle between being realistic and real and just doing things that, giving kids books that are entertaining and real as opposed to trying to teach them a lesson, and being very didactic. And this is the first children's book printed in America. It's in 1656. And it was basically from the Puritans, and the Puritans believed that children were evil and needed to be fixed. So this was very didactic, very moralistic, and so this was their first book. It's a catechism. A little later, this one was printed in England. It's the Orbis Pictus, and we remember seeing that before because we talked about the award. And it is a picture book of world phenomena, world, things that you see in the world. And it was considered a much better book. It's not didactic. It's, something more kids could really enjoy. One stories that kids used to enjoy for a long time, it was actually published in 1484, a lot earlier than the other books. And it is Aesop's Fables, and it had woodcut illustrations. Then we go on to The Tales of Mother Goose, published in 1697 by Charles Perrault in France, who was a French author. And then the article talks about chapbooks that along about the same time, children and adults were enjoying these little cheap chapbooks, and they were like Tales of Robin Hood and stuff like that the Puritans were just freaking out about because they didn't want people to, read these horrible things. They thought they were bad for people, but lots of these cheap penny dreadfuls were going around about that time, and kids and adults enjoyed them. And then one of the most famous early books was The History of Little Goody Two Shoes, and it's by John Newbery, and you'll recognize that name, John Newbery. And this book was just, enjoyable and fun, and not there to necessarily to teach a lesson, though there were moral lessons in there, but there was it was enjoyable and stuff like that, and delightful. Another, back during that time that kids were and still enjoying books that were actually meant for children. Here are two examples. There are others in the article. And in the early 1800s, Grimm and Anderson, they were writing the fairy tale collections. There's a picture from The Princess and the Pea. And something that came about back then was, in the early 1800s, was verse and limericks. So they were things that children enjoyed back then. And then in the mid to late 19th century was a big time for fantasy books. And we know, Alice in Wonderland came out then, and Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling came out then, and lots of others. Jules Verne at that time as well. And then we have some big ones here, Little Women. I read it, so I know most people did. And one thing special about that is that, Jo wasn't, the main character wasn't inferior or timid or anything like that. And most books with women and girl characters were kind of, that way back then. And then, of course, we have the great Tom Sawyer coming in toward the end of the 19th century. And there were improved printing techniques about then. So we came across the time of the great illustrators, and the first picture is from The House That Jack Built by Caldecott, and the other one is by Kate Greenaway. And both of these guys are now the name bearers of some children's book awards. Caldecott's in the United States. The Greenaway Award is in England. In 1902, they call Beatrix Potter the mother of children's picture books, and that Peter Rabbit, it's the firstborn, and it's basically because she was the first one to actually tell the story in pictures. We talked about that in class, how, the pictures are part of the story. We saw the interview with Anthony Brown, and he talked about how, the kids might be looking at the pictures and the adult is reading in the words, but they're both telling the story. So she was the first to tell the story in the pictures. And here we have the first American picture book by Wanda Gag in 1927. That's considered our first American picture book. And then Dr. Seuss's first book came along in 1937. An important series, and we talked about these before, were the Underground books. These are the Stratemeyer books, and two of them are the Bobbsey twins, and you have Nancy Drew, and there's a bunch of others. There's the Hardy Boys and stuff like that. And, the article says, they're very popular, but they're lesser quality, and we talked about that before. Some people believe that Stratemeyer actually wrote the first Bobbsey twin book, but then he had lots of other people write for him, even though kids still think Carolyn Keene I thought Carolyn Keene wrote The Secret of the Old Clock. I had no idea that she was just a made-up person. So there you go. Just a pseudonym. So the 1950s, excuse me, brought some enduring classics. We have Charlotte's Web, that's still hanging around, of course. And then we have The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, all came across in the 1950s. And then in the 1960s brought us some of the age of new realism, where, the peak, we talked about before that there's this war, between wanting books for children to tell a message and to be moral teachers as opposed to being real and authentic. And Harriet the Spy was a book that I read as a kid, and I liked it because it was about a writer and it was cool. Because when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a writer. But there's lots of controversy about the way Harriet dressed and and the way she acted. And at the very end, I think she goes to therapy and stuff like that. So, and then Max, of course, was very disobedient to his parents. So these are things that were controversial at the time because, books are supposed to give perfect messages to kids and not real messages to kids. And then here we have two important books, because The Snowy Day was in the 1963 Caldecott winner, and it is the first time that you see an African American child as a character in a Caldecott winning book. And also, it's one of the first books where it wasn't negative stereotypes of African Americans. And then M.C. Higgins the Great was actually written by an African American author, and that's the first Newbery written by an African American author about African American children. Funny thing about The Snowy Day is I picked it when I was in undergraduate, like you guys are, to be I wanted to do Ezra Jack Keats because I wanted to do him because he wrote about black kids. And he was my author illustrator that I picked out, and I was surprised to find out that he is a white guy. He's not black. So, there you go. And then, shocking realism of the 1970s. I don't know. When I was looking this up on the internet and found this picture for Forever, it was said, find the cover of the Forever version that you read. And so this is the cover of the books that I read. I don't know if everybody's read Forever. Woohoo, And Are You There? It's Me. Margaret is another one by Judy Blume that was very, very realistic. And, talked about sexuality and stuff like that. And then we also have this one, Journey to Topaz, which is about Japanese internment, which hadn't really been discussed a lot. We didn't talk about that much by then. So there came the 1970s. And then in the 1990s, we came up with, the article talks about paperback. It became really cheap to make paperback books, and picture books became paperback, so they became less expensive. And also the paperback series of the 1990s, again, the Underground books, the Goosebumps, and the Bailey School Kids. And again, I have never read any of these books, but my students read plenty of them. And then as we get into the late 20th century, run into books, and then early 21st century, we get into books that, begin to outsell adult books. And, everybody understands the Harry Potter phenomenon, and then Twilight. Also, I did read Harry Potter. I did not read Twilight. And then the 21st century has brought us graphic novels, and notice that this is something that's popular in recent books. You have Louis Gaiman books, or a lot of his are graphic novels, and this one won the Caldecott recently. And our story we're reading, Ulysses, Flora and Ulysses, is also a novel that mixes pictures and words together in an interesting and new way. All right, there we have it. Thanks for listening.